First, I want to thank each and every one of you, from our friends from Taiwan, from China. There's so many different groups within our Chinese groups also, so we'll have to see who are here and who are not here. Then we have to also make sure that those who are not here are represented the next time or in another forum, another place. Then we also have our Uyghur friend from Hong Kong. We just met in Toronto last time. The vice president of our Mongolian friends are here. The president is sitting down there. And then our friends from Manchuria also for the first time are here. Then we have also friends from Korea. So this conference is being organized by Tibet Policy Institute under the Department of Information and International Relations. And I'm very thankful to all of you for accepting the invitation to be present here. What you will see around here is a very small place where the Central Tibetan Administration is located. But those of you who have been here already several times, many of whom we have already met, some of you are quite new to Dharamsala. So those who are new, I'm sure you'll get to see the whole structure of the Central Tibetan Administration as to how we govern ourselves through a democratic polity over the last 63 years. And as some of the speakers said, if there is something that you can learn from our democratic experience, we have always said that we would be very happy to cooperate with any of the groups who are represented here. The reason why I say this is because we face an opponent like China. So all of us are victims of the same government, same policies, same programs. Maybe there are little variations in different parts of China, depending on the nature of the cause, historical background of those causes, and the approaches that every group is taking in its own way. So there may be little differences, but overall, the Chinese government policies and programs are the same in the whole of China. Therefore, it is inevitable that we all come together to face our common opponent. As Tibetans, when we follow nonviolence, we don't even like to call China as our enemy. We call China our opponent. So we all face a common opponent. That is why it's very important that we all meet together. Of course, over the last 50, 60 years, we have our own history of having worked together, particularly the Mongolians and the Uyghurs and the Tibetans. Many decades ago, we formed this allied committee of the leaders of different groups. From Uyghur, we had at the earliest Erkin Eptikan, and later by Rabia Kadir, and now Dolkun Isa. Unfortunately, Dolkun is not here this time. Even within the Uyghur group, there are several groups. So we have to make sure how all these groups are also represented in future if we are talking about cooperation of everybody together. First, there has to be unity amongst the Tibetans, amongst the Uyghurs, amongst the Chinese, amongst the Hong Kongers, amongst the Taiwanese, and Manchus, and Mongolians. First, we have to achieve unity amongst ourselves. Then also we have to have a certain degree of democratic practice if we want to replicate that inside China. Oh, I forgot. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Mrs. Liu Xiaobao, whose sacrifices has been immense in the promotion of democracy and freedom in China. And we will definitely miss his leadership for a long time to come. And, but we are sure that his sacrifices definitely will not go in vain. There has to be an accumulative result of all the sacrifices by leaders like Liu Xiaobao and others who have represented the Chinese people, not just the Chinese people, but also Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Mongols, and Hong Kongers, and all others. So what you see around here is because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So I keep saying, I've been Sikyong for the last 2 years. Of course, I was Speaker of the House and I was Member of the Parliament for the last 20 years, from 1996 to 2016. But all I can say is, whatever we have here, and whenever we travel around the world, and the respect that we get from other countries is all because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Some of our Uyghur friends used to say, this does not reflect on everybody, but some of our Uyghur friends many years ago told me that Uyghurs have body, no head. Tibetans have head, but no body. So, which means they are pointing to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So it's because of the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama that even though our population is very small in exile, it's only about 130,000 Tibetans in exile. I was just asking our Uyghur friend here as to how many Uyghurs are there in the diaspora community. It's much, much more than the Tibetans. And Hong Kongers, just this time when I was in Scotland, I met some of your friends there. And in UK alone, there are about 100,000 Hong Kongers who has the right to vote in the British elections. So your influence should be much more. But with Mongolia, we still have Mongolian population and Tibetan population are quite similar, so we have less diaspora community. Now, Taiwan is one country that we really look up to. As you said, you practice democracy, you have developed your resilience against such a force. So what I want to stress on, every time we meet together, it is more like we are telling each other our stories. Now I think that should come to an end, because we all know each other's stories. If we give a little more attention to what is happening, not just only to you and your own people, but also to what's happening in Manchuria or Mongolia or East Turkestan or Tibet or Hong Kong or Taiwan. So if we keep watch on what is happening, then we don't need to tell each other's stories, because it's almost the same story that we keep hearing from each other. So now what we need to do is we need to focus more on what we can do together, because we all talked about collective responsibility, cooperation amongst ourselves. So the topic also from the Tibet Policy Institute side is the impact of the changing or the dynamics of global politics. As we are speaking here, as we are meeting here, a lot of things are changing. A lot of things are changing. And when we were listening to the proceedings of the G7, it looked more like the whole world is going to be polarized. If you look at the participants and if you look at the special invitees at those conferences, it looks more like it's an ideological war between democracy and autocracy. Then if you listen to the Shangri-La dialogue that just concluded in Singapore, which is the only security forum conference of that nature in Asia, there also a lot of mixed messages are coming, a lot of confrontationalist views are also coming. And if you look at the global political scenario, we see a lot of mixed signals from Chinese government and also a lot of mixed signals from the European countries. It's very difficult to make out what exactly is going on in the minds of those leaders. So we have to decipher all this. We have to analyze all this. And we have to see what challenges the new situation offers collectively for all of us and individually for a single nationality or a single group. So those also need to be explored. Then we have to see, of course, we have to understand the situation inside China. For those things, sometimes our Chinese friends and our Taiwanese friends are more well-informed than us. So there should be a system of sharing information amongst ourselves as to how we can, when we reach out to the international community also, we have to know what Hong Kongers are speaking to the governments, what Tibetans are speaking to the governments, what Taiwanese are speaking to the government. So there has to be some concerted effort in our approach in advocacy also, and what ask are we? Of course, there will be specific asks by different nationalities or different people or different countries, but then there could be some common interests. How do we address those common interests? So these are issues which we have been trying to raise. So I referred to the Allied Committee that was formed, but it's now no more there. It's not functioning as it was meant to be. And then UNPO was formed, UNPO was formed. Even now, the efficacy of UNPO itself is very much in question. There are also questions about the size of UNPO and who all became part of the UNPO group. That is also something that has been going on for a long time. And in the last few years, Yang Jie has been taking the lead in organizing meetings of all the Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongols, and others. I attended one of those conferences in Taiwan several years ago, and those were very good opportunities for us to meet. But I think what is more important for us is to discuss about strategies. Now let's not try to educate each other on what is happening in our own region. Now we have to strategize as to what is happening inside China, in your own country, and the international reaction to all this. China needs Europe now more than ever before. So that's why I keep telling the Europeans that if you kowtow to China all the time, then you will become like a pony, like a horse or a donkey. Then the Chinese will keep riding you all the time if you don't stand up to your position. Then we also tell the Europeans, if you think you are, we have this Tibetan expression, butter and stone. So you keep the butter there and you hit the stone at the butter loses. You keep the stone there and you hit the butter at the stone, also the butter loses. So we tell them, if you think you are the butter, then you will always lose. You have to stand up for the strength you have and the values that you so cherish. Otherwise, China will never respect you. Now, some countries say, oh, the dragon is biting us. So I tell them, who fed the dragon? Who made the dragon as strong as it is today? So it's the Americans, it's the Europeans, it's the Japanese, it's Taiwanese people also. So all the developed countries are responsible for making China for what it is today. And the developed countries thought that they will be able to tame the dragon, but unfortunately we have not been able to tame the dragon. So if you know that you are not able to tame the dragon, and if you know that the dragon is biting back at you, then you have to rethink about how you feed the dragon. Whether you want to make the dragon more stronger, or you want to make sure that dragon is also becomes more responsible in this world. So therefore, study of the situation inside China is very, very important. That is where our Chinese friends and Taiwanese friends and also those who are watching China carefully, those information need to be shared. Now, of course, we have much more access to a lot more information that is coming out through different news medias, but then again, internal assessments of situations are very, very useful. So periodic review of political situation inside China, including all the nationality areas, including in Taiwan, including in Hong Kong, I think those are very, very important for us to be strategic in our approach to the international community. How much ever the Chinese government says that they don't care about international noises, they do care. We all know that. So that is why we have to reach out to the international community as much as possible. And when we reach out also, there should be some common causes. Like we think right now, European Union is one region where we have to reach out more, because they are just waking up to the reality. They have not been able to read the writing on the wall since 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. they feel that they will not be able to take on two major forces like Russia and China together. So all these perceptions also we need to see. On the larger holistic level, we do understand that Europeans are now waking up to the reality in the last 1.5, 2 years particularly. And that happened only after freedom knocked on their door when Russia invaded Ukraine, not before that. Everybody thought China is too far away. So right now there is the recognition from majority of the European leaders and the community that the immediate threat is Russia, but the long-term challenge is China. So that recognition is there. So based on that, how much ever Chinese government says that they don't care about opinion of the international community, it does matter. So that is why we have to reach out to the European countries at this present moment as much as possible, because China is reaching out to Europe, because they need the European market. But what message is China sending to the Europeans? I fail to understand, because if you just watch from situation of last year, and former Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi went to Europe to attend the Munich Security Council, then he met with Macron, President Macron, he met with President Scholz, then he was received very well by Hungary, President Orban, and then he goes to Putin. And a month later, President Xi travels to Russia and meets with Putin just after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin. So on the one hand, they need the European market. On the other hand, they are maintaining much more closer ties with Russia. So what do we make of this? So the message, the overall message that we are getting from China is, we need your market, we will operate on that level. The Western nations need China for climate change, to cooperate on climate change, but don't interfere in our domestic affairs, what they say. So they don't want any interference. That is why they need the foreign investment in China, but then they also have counter-espionage law, amendment to that, make it more difficult. So what message is China sending to the world? That is something the Europeans also need to understand. Now, I would also tell the Europeans the signal that we are seeing is not very positive, because post-zero COVID, you see so many European leaders going to China, starting from Scholz to Macron to von der Leyen to Baerbock. Now German Foreign Minister is also going to be there, Pistorius. So all these, and then Lula going there from Brazil. It looks more like Europe cannot survive without Russia. But is this really the case? Because if you look at the trade balance of all these nations with China, everybody has trade deficit with China. So till we are able to control the balance of trade that's in favor of China, always talking about in the realm of $3 trillion. As long as China has these trade balances, they don't care about anything else. So despite the rhetoric of the Western nations, business has been going up, even with United States. I was there in the United States when President Trump took over, and then the trade war started. But despite the rhetoric, trade is going up, even with all the European countries. I've been looking at export-import trade balances with major countries. So it is China that needs Europe more than Europe needing China more. So all these calculations also has to happen. And if the Europeans don't value the freedom and human dignity and all the other rights that are taken for granted, tomorrow if it knocks their door, then only they will realize that it's not very far away. Geographical boundaries doesn't make difference, that everything is interdependent in this world right now. So therefore, I urge all the participants, let us stop talking about our own problems. Let us start talking about how do we challenge the Chinese government. Of course, we all have our own different historical backgrounds. We have our own different approaches. We have our different objectives. But despite those differences, how do we pool our energies, resources together to tackle China? At least, maybe to start with, can we organize a big gathering of all the people, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Tibetans, Mongols, Chinese, and everybody somewhere in Europe to send a message to the Chinese government that we all can come together. Several thousand people somewhere in Europe. Then all of us can speak about our own cases, but then it will show a united face to the world. So we have changed our strategy. Even though we stick with the middle way policy, we changed our strategy in the sense that we decided to focus on the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. So now you also need to think whether you need to re-strategize, because even though we follow the middle way policy, if there has to be a leverage, because when the whole international Chinese government asks the international community to say Tibet is part of PRC, and the whole international community say that, and on the other hand, the international community also say, we support negotiation between representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. And we say these two don't go together, because China rules Tibet with an iron hand, and then the whole international community keeps saying Tibet is part of PRC. Then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? Because the international community is removing that very reason. So that is why we started focusing on the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, to give leverage to the middle way approach. People should realize that His Holiness has climbed down from independence to middle way. Because China's propaganda is so strong and so pervasive, they have all the resources. That people think that Tibetans and Uyghurs and all others must have been part of China since time immemorial, or antiquity as they say it. So when is antiquity again? So one reason is to send a message to the Chinese government that it cannot force its history on the world, because history cannot be changed by whims and fancies of politicians and governments. It has to be based on facts. So I think all of us also need to revisit our history. Then I also tell the international community, have you read Tibetan history? Have you read Uyghur history, East Turkestan history? Have you read Mongol history? Because in Chinese history, Yuan is only that period when the Mongols ruled China. That is from 1271 to 1368. Mongols were there even before that and even after that. We had relations with the Mongols much before that. So those history are also important. So when you talk about Chinese dynasty, then you talk about the Yuan and the Qing. So whether the Qings are Manchus, we have our friend here. From a typical Han Chinese societal perspective, Manchus are not Chinese. We don't have to look very far to look for evidence. You just watch some Kung Fu movies and you see that Chinese, Han Chinese are all protagonists and Manchus are all antagonists. So even if we consider the Yuan and the Qings also as Chinese dynasties, there are a lot of historical aspects that need to be told to the outside world, because most of the people rely on China for East Asian history, but unfortunately, East Asian history as propagated by the Chinese government is not the reality. So we have to send a message to the international community that you can't trust the Chinese government on the true narrative of the history of the nationalities also. Then the third reason why we focus on history is also to tell our own people. I tell my own people, Tibetans, as to how many of you know Tibetan history. Because if you have to fight for a struggle, you have to know history, you have to know the present situation, you have to know the legal angle and all such aspects. So even for Tibetans and for Uyghurs also, for Mongols also, they have to understand their history. If the Tibetans don't study Tibetan history, who else will study Tibetan history? If Mongolians don't study Mongolian history, then who else will study Mongolian history? Because just one mobile is enough to while away so much of your time. There are so many things that can distract you. But you should be in a position to tell your history. Only then it will resonate. Now, going back to history also resonates because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Russia's claim of legitimacy on Ukraine as being part of the Soviet bloc. So all these come in handy. So it's very important that we don't forget our history. But what is more important is how do we move together in future, in multilateral forums, in national governments, how do we lobby for that? Particularly in the European Union, can we develop a mechanism whereby we can reach out to one office in the European Union where pro-democracy Chinese or Hong Kongers and Taiwanese, all of us can reach out to one office. That will make our life much more easier instead of reaching out to 27 different countries. Now, we don't have all the resources also. So at least as Tibetans, with the blessing and guidance and foresightedness of His Holiness, we have an exiled government with a democratic polity, we have our judiciary, we have our parliament, we have our executive, we have election commission, public service commission, and auditor general's office, and all the departments that are part of a democratic norm or a system. Our Uyghur friends have also adopted democracy, but they don't have a system yet. That is also a challenge. Do you need a system or not? Because one good thing for you is since you don't have a whole system, you can go anywhere to advocate for your people whenever you are invited. We have a system here. So the bad side of the system is that you also have to spend a lot of time to manage that. Then you have democracy, then you have the laws, you have institutions, division of power, checks and balances and all that. But I think it's worth it to have this experience in exile if we have to replicate this in our own countries in future, or for that matter, democracy in China, because nobody wants anarchy in China. It's not possible. The consequences will be too severe for the whole world. So we have to find novel ways, we have to strategize, we have to deal with China collectively and individually. So this meeting, we are hoping that we will think more in terms of how we approach this problem and how we come together to do that, rather than talk only about our problems. We can talk about our problems to other audiences who doesn't know about our problems. But talking about our problem within our community itself does not help very much. It's just informing each other who already knows each other's cases. So in whichever way you decide after this meeting that we can work together in whatever form, at whatever level. It's not possible to work every day together. It's not possible because we are all different cases. We all have our own priorities and all that. But then there should be at least a common minimum program for this. Even last year, June, I told Tolkun also at that time, the Parliament, Tibetan Parliament in Exile organized the World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet in Washington, D.C. in June 22nd, 23rd last year. And we kept one subject, common ground, how to face common challenges. So, but that was not taken up. It was the same thing. Every time Uyghur speaks about Uyghur problem, Tibet speaks about Tibet problem, Chinese speak about Chinese problem, but we don't reach nowhere. So at least during this session, I'm hoping that even though not all leaders are represented here, I also want to acknowledge Wekaishi here, whom we know for quite a long time now. We met in Italy many years ago. And he's also a leading figure in pro-democracy movement in Thailand, in Taiwan. We have Shaming and many other friends around the world. But the problems with Chinese also the same thing. Our friends from Australia. Last time when I was there in Australia, in the morning, another program, afternoon, another program for the Tiananmen Square anniversary. And then they all tell me they want to host a dinner. So I said, if everybody comes together, I'll also come for dinner. If our people remain divided, then it doesn't make sense to have dinner also. Even His Holiness said many times, if all the Chinese dissidents, pro-Chinese leaders can come together, then His Holiness will also come and speak with them. So that is also important. Even for Hong Kongers, I was telling, this time I was in Scotland, but there were two groups, again, among Hong Kongers, in one small place in Scotland. So they were not even talking to each other. So I said, this is not the way how we need to move forward. Hong Kong has the capacity. It's all very young, dynamic, educated people. They have a lot of capacity. But we have to develop the resilience of an organization because we are facing an opponent like China. So we have to be organized, but otherwise every individual will have their interests, and after some time then they do lose their interests, and then the sparks of that fight, the spirit of fighting goes away naturally. So we need to develop this. Even to the Hong Kongers also, we said anything that you can learn from here, we'll be happy to provide them any assistance in any way possible. So even Tibetans is a little more easier because of this administration. We have elected leadership. So if you want to reach out officially, there is only one central Tibetan administration. So it's very easy. Of course, you can invite non-governmental organizations at different platforms and all that, but as a central Tibetan administration representing all the Tibetans inside and outside Tibet, we are one organization. So if there could be structures like that, it'll make it much easier for all of us to come together. And today, if you have Shaming, then tomorrow somebody will say, oh, we are not represented there. So then again, the question is, who commands respect over the people? Suppose we decide to organize a huge program in Europe, maybe next year or the end of this year, then who will be represented from the Chinese side? Will all the Chinese leaders come together or not? These are areas I think we need to work. First, to unite ourselves, develop some common ground, how to move together, and then we can have more, I think, concrete and more bold ideas as to how we can contain China or handle China, or how we can achieve our own objectives. So we also have to be prepared for the long run, as His Holiness always says. I think just as every other community has this saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So here, for Tibetans also, it's not like we don't have challenges. We do have a lot of challenges. The compact communities in India, Nepal, and Bhutan are now getting, people are moving out. A lot of younger people are moving out who can give birth to children, who can have productive labor. They are moving out. So the sustainability of compact communities is also a challenge for us. So our mind is geared towards how do we turn every challenge into an opportunity. So in the last 30, 40 years, we had a number of Tibetans who came from Tibet who don't have anything to call their own, not even an inch of land here in exile. So we decided to combine these two challenges, prepared a new program to provide housing for those Tibetans who have come from inside Tibet and relocate them to the places where we have compact communities. Because of the compact communities, we managed to preserve our language. We managed to preserve our own religion, our culture. So it is because of these compact communities that we managed to survive over the last 63 years. Whatever was destroyed inside Tibet, we managed to replicate in exile. And this, we think, is a very, very important achievement. So I won't take more of your time. There are many scholars, there are many prominent people who are not on the dais right now, but who will be speaking in the meetings to follow. And I will be meeting separately with some of you, and I'll be listening. I'm sure there'll be feedback from the proceedings of all these meetings. And our Minister for Information and International Relations, we just came this morning. We woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning this morning, and we came up to make sure that we are here for the inaugural. and Department for Information and International Relations will also be vigorously involving themselves in coordinating events within and amongst ourselves to make sure that whatever decision is reached here, there is a semblance of following up on that, and we have to deliver. It's not just enough to have meetings. So thank you so much for your attendance. I miss people like Yang Jenny, who has been very, very proactive in getting all the groups together. And this time he's not here, probably because his travel document is still not ready. But otherwise, we have many friends who are not represented here. We have to also explore ideas about how we can make it more representative, how we can have more groups in this, so that all the energies can be pooled. If all the groups are not represented, then again, why Shaming is there, why I'm not invited, we will not follow this because we were not part of this conference. So all these will keep on going. And if all these keep on going, then it won't make any sense. Forget about fighting the Chinese. We will be fighting amongst ourselves. So we don't need to waste time on this. So please concentrate and let us come out after this meeting with some concrete proposals as to how we can move forward. So thank you so much. So day after tomorrow, you will meet with His Holiness, and His Holiness is now going to be 88 this July. And on 6th of July, we'll be celebrating his birthday. It's very close, very near from here. And if some of you are staying, you will have the opportunity to attend His Holiness' birthday celebration. But His Holiness keeps assuring us that he will live up to the age of 113. And he also keeps assuring us that he will live for more than 2 decades. I think the message is more for the Chinese leadership. That is why I tell our Chinese friends, let us see whether His Holiness the Dalai Lama outlives the Communist Party or the Communist Party outlives the Dalai Lama. Okay. So let us make sure that all the efforts of leaders like Liu Xiaobao and others do not go to waste, including our own nationalities. In the Mongolians also we have heroes. In Hong Kong also we have heroes. Manchu also we have. But unfortunately, today in Manchuria, I don't know if there are any elders who speak the Manchukuo language. Manchukuo language is almost gone. Yeah, now everybody speaks Mandarin. That is the problem. We want Manchu people to speak Manchukuo language. And I look forward to more interactions during this session and into the future. Thank you again. Thank you.